Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, 6 Critical Steps to Cutting the Cost of College. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katie Flynn from savingforcollege.com, and joining me is Joe Messenger, founder and CEO of Capstone College Partners. For those of you who don't know Joe, he's the leading authority on late-stage college funding. Capstone College Partners is on a mission to end the student loan crisis one family at a time. They provide training, resources, software, and thought leadership to raise the bar in college funding advice. At the end of today's presentation, Joe will give you more details on how to access free and paid training from Capstone, and also a special discount available through savingforcollege.com. We're about to get started. I have a few quick announcements. All participants who attend the entire webinar in full will be eligible to receive 1 CFP CE credit, and an email is going to be sent out tomorrow with a couple links where you can fill in your information to receive the CE credit. And then if you have any questions during the webinar, you can enter them into the question box on your control panel. And Joe is going to be taking questions at the end of the presentation, and he'll do his best to get to as many as possible. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Joe.
Awesome, thanks. And yeah, excited to be here with savingforcollege.com. Obviously, all the work they do of getting people prepped to get to college, and now this whole paying for college thing has obviously become a big part of the puzzle as well, and financial aid and all those pieces. So obviously very relevant in the news. If you watched it over the last couple days, what's going on with admissions and how important that is to parents and the lengths they are willing to go. So excited to be here. As Katie mentioned, the mission is in the student loan crisis one family at a time. And we really feel like the way to do that is raising the bar in college funding advice. This is an area that most advisors have never been formally trained in. So, what we're looking to do is really empower advisors with good tools, resources, and not just, propose, here's the problems, but actually propose solutions in our college pre-approval process is how we would suggest we do that. So just to set the table for kind of what we're talking about today. When we're talking about the paying for college aspects, 2 things. So we've got parents and students and just kind of the whole makeup of what's going on in education today. So right now, Gen X is pretty much in their 40s and early 50s. So their number one financial concern, and survey after survey, is how do we pay for college for our kids? So particularly those that are in what we call kind of the mass affluent and affluent space, their number one financial concern is college, getting a great education for their kids. So from a I guess I call it kind of the market standpoint, when we look at how many kids are in school and graduating, we've got about 16 million kids in high school, and around about 3.5 million expected to graduate each year, and 7 out of 10 of them are going directly onto college. So, and I think particularly in probably a lot of the communities where we all work and live, the vision is a 4-year traditional college. So for a lot of families. So there are lots of things being talked about, ways to cut the cost, getting college credits in high school, certainly a lot of pieces of the puzzle, earning AP credits. There's a lot of different ways that are being talked about to cut the cost of college, going to junior college for little or no cost for a couple of years, making that free is obviously proposals we've heard. But like I said, the reality is most of our Gen X parents, they envision that 4-year traditional college, and again, 7 out of 10 kids are going directly into a college program right out of high school. So that's kind of where we're at. And the other thing I talk about with this is this isn't going away, right? We know there's going to be 3-4 million kids per year looking at how do we get into college, pay for college, and navigate this process. College costs, when we look at them on face value, the sticker price today, this is College Board's numbers from last year. They projected that the average 4-year public in-state school is right around $25,000. And if we look at our private schools, it's right around $50,000. Coincidentally, 4-year private school, that average number there is also about the average price of an out-of-state school. So those numbers are there. And then if we had another column for our elite private schools, the vast majority of them will be over $70,000, at least in the high $60,000s going into next year. So one of the good news here when we talk about the cost is that we have seen some slowing. So we're seeing about a 3 to 4% increase in tuition costs, which is good. It's better than the 6% we've been seeing for decades. But still, the costs continue to rise while our folks are in school. People see that, if they've got a freshman in college or a freshman in high school today, by the time they go, it probably won't be 25. It'll be closer to 30,000 for 1 year of public and closer to 60,000 for private. So that's kind of where we're at. The good news is when we look at these, the sticker price is irrelevant. And as we walk through the 6 steps, that becomes a key part of this, is really taking some of the opaque nature out of college funding and how to be informed consumers and help guide families through the process. The average 4-year private institution, for example, their most recent statistics are they were discounting tuition 49.1%. So again, what we always say, sticker price is irrelevant if we're informed on how we can find good free money to help pay for college. The student loan crisis is real. So some of the numbers that are out there. This is from the Federal Reserve. Their estimates are we're somewhere between $2,500 and $3,000 per second that we add to our national student loan debt. So to do the quick math, if we spend an hour together today, that's about $10 million we add to the national student loan debt. So back in 2003, we were coming in at right around $250 billion. A short 15 years later, we have surpassed the $1.5 trillion mark. So we added over $100 billion just in 2018 alone. Over $100 billion was added to the national student loan debt. One of the things, some scary statistics again there, one of the things is that recent studies showed that the fastest growing population of those with student loans are those over 50 years old. So that is kind of a scary statistic. We've got a lot of times parents and then also some graduate students who just got in over their heads too. But between those two, we've got people in their 50s still paying off student loans, be that for their kids or for themselves. So some alarming statistics. The default rates are not a pretty story either. So, but when we dig deeper, the whole idea when we look at helping families, for us, it's how does this impact this young adult? So how, when this young adult's coming out of school, what's this outcome look like if we invest in this education? So estimates are 7 out of 10 will graduate with student loans. There's a lot of I call it, guilt and anxiety and stress around college funding, and everybody would love for their kids to graduate without student loans. But the reality is 7 out of 10 graduates do have student loans. And on average, they think these are estimates, but there's a lot of different folks that have done this, but around 37,000 on average. And one of the rules of thumb that I always say is if you have, for every 10,000 you take out, you're going to owe roughly $100 back per month on the standard 10-year repayment schedule. And I hammer that one home, and we'll get into that as we get into the 6 steps, because our goal, is to graduate with manageable student loan debt and be done with that debt within 10 years on the standard repayment. The only thing that's made any progress is pushing your payments out 20 and 25 years. That's the only kind of thing they've said that helps. But we all know as financial folks that the life of the loan payment is significantly more, and whoever's collecting that debt's going to have 2 to 3 times as much interest. And our largest collector is the federal government. So that's kind of setting the table. And if you can, there's a little chat box. I just wanted to get an idea. As we go through this, you are obviously all here because you're interested in college funding. But I would like to just know if you've completed any formal training or education. We're certainly not the only folks that have good programs for this. But if you can just type in there, if yes or no, if you have had any formal training into the boxes, that'd be great. I'm just trying to get an idea of what it is. We know that there is a gap in financial aid and college funding planning within the curriculum for any of us that have advanced, credentials. So we know that is a challenge. So, so the next question I would ask is, when you look at doing these things, how confident are you in providing financial aid and college funding advice? Do we feel like we're expert? We're confident? Do we know a little, know a lot? And because I think, very, very common is people are maybe somewhat confident, they've been through it a few times, but it's becoming more and more of a demand from clientele. So that's kind of what we're looking to find out. So I'm going to jump into really the critical steps, to cutting the cost of college and getting through this maze that we've laid out. So when we look at this, here's kind of this is the journey, right, for our families that we're serving. So we've got, young adults looking at this college thing. We've got their parents a lot of times, obviously a steering part of that as well. So step number one is preparing for the cost. So we would love it if everybody, was, started saving when they had a newborn, right? But the reality is, a lot of times the dollars are stretched thin when you've got a young family. So, when we look at that's great, and we can all run the projection that shows, if you want to go to a state school and have it paid for, you need to be saving, $389 per month into a 529 college savings plan, and that's what you need to do. But when you've got 2-3 kids, again, those dollars are stretched thin. So a lot of folks, if they've had that ability to, to save, that's great, but a lot of times we see as a balance of 15 to 25,000, even with folks that have done a diligent job of saving. But we're going to talk about preparing for that cost. That's actually what we'll spend the most time on today. Is how do we preface this and create good expectations for families, so that they can have good conversations with one another, as well as with their students. And we'd like to say having those conversations long before step number 2. So before we even begin applying for admissions and scholarships and really doing the scholarship search, what we would suggest is we need to figure out what our budgets are and kind of how we're going to look from a financial aid standpoint, and then understand the other pieces of the puzzle. We'll come back at the end. How do you analyze potentially appeal financial aid offers? That's where we're at right now in the season. Financial aid offers are coming out. A lot of them, Friday is one of the big days where a lot of our top schools are going to be releasing their full financial aid offers to folks. So how do we look at that? How do we compare them apples to apples, side by side? And at the end of the day, we choose a school, but top right, how do we cover the shortfall? What's the best way to strategically do this? How do we pay for all 4 years down to the penny? Right, and if we do, what's our loans there, and what's our subsequent loan payment? So those are our 6 steps that we run through. So we'll get through those today, and hopefully provide some good examples along the way. There is going to be part of the follow-up, the ebook that is the 6 critical steps to cutting the cost of college. You will be receiving as follow-up to this. So just FYI. Okay, so when we talk about step number 1. I really think this paves the road, and this is probably the most important part of this, to give yourself opportunities to success in the long, and as you go through the process. Our step number 1, many of you may know us for this, but is college pre-approval. So it's a novel concept in college planning, but set a budget before you go shopping. So we'll go through our process to do that. A lot of folks developing college criteria. So and we'll go through, do they have the majors that lead you to the career that you want? What are the intangibles they have? Do they help you? What are their graduation rates? How far is it from home? Do you want an urban or a rural setting? A lot of those pieces of the puzzle, those aren't things that we dig into too deep, other than just using some of our college search tools. We leave that to independent education consultants. We like to, as I say, stay in our lane, is mostly what we would say. And stick with the finances, but we know that these things are important as folks begin to develop their lists. So, and then another piece is with college funding. As you develop your list, you want to have schools that you know are within your safety, target, and reach. So, again, from an academic standpoint, I'll walk you through some of the ways that you determine that, and also determine what schools you may be eligible for financial aid at. So from a academic standpoint, and then that also relates to financially, the safety, target, and reach as well. Another piece, we'll talk through a little bit on EFC at a high level. We're not going to dig into the details. It's beyond the context of this particular talk. There's about 2 hours of that in our curriculum about EFC. And then we'll walk through net cost. How do we project a net cost? As I said, that sticker price is irrelevant if we know how to shop. And then we got to understand, after any merit scholarships or need-based financial aid, what's our true out-of-pocket? How do we assess that? How do we begin to look at that? And then, if we're doing this the right way, really, we're going to look at is our academic and financial strategies to improve our situation. So that's not just, let's get the most financially, but also the things we can be doing to structure our assets to give us the best possibility from a tax planning standpoint as well. So academic and financial strategies, the academics, I'll give you some specific examples of how boosting your academics can directly tie to getting more money for college. So step number one, so what we would propose is, if you would look at the way that you go through a mortgage process of buying a home, any good realtor, the first thing they're going to ask you to do is to go get a mortgage pre-approval letter. And the bank's going to ask you a number of questions. Where do you work? How long do you work there? How much do you make? What's your credit score? What's your other debt? What's your ability to make a down payment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? What that bank's trying to figure out is, if we give you, this is the most amount of loan we can give you, that we think you can reasonably repay us, right? So this is an example a lot, but if I walk in and ask for a loan for this 24-bedroom house, which is LeBron's house outside of Akron, or it used to be when he was in the area anyway. Who knows if he still has it? I bet he can probably still afford it though, so he could probably get another one if he wanted to. But if I walk into the bank and ask for it, I get denied, right? So one of the problems I see with the way that we approach college a lot of times is we're tasking 16, 17, 18-year-old young adults. Many of them have not ever even worked before, and they've certainly never been through a personal finance course to understand what a loan is and what the interest rate and all those pieces of puzzle. Unless, very rarely do we see students that really kind of get this unless they've taken it on themselves. So, the other analogy I give is, I don't go test drive Lamborghinis and Ferraris and Bentleys because I don't need $500,000 cars. It's not in the budget. So yet. So, that's what we're talking about here. So what we look at is the way most folks shop for school doesn't follow our six-step process. They start shopping for school by going on visits. So if you've got a junior right now in high school, you're doing visits over spring break many times. You're going down the East Coast if you're on the East Coast, and you're looking at some great schools potentially, but you're going to schools like a Vanderbilt, like a Wake Forest, like Duke, like North Carolina, these beautiful schools, and they are amazing schools with great products, and they will convince you no matter what it costs, you should come here. And the problem for young students is they feel if they've done the work, which is getting good grades and good test scores, well, why shouldn't they be able to go there, right? So if we can start these conversations earlier on the left, and we can talk about how do we figure out what our actual budget is, what do we have in the bank, right? And it's not just 529s. Like, how do we actually figure out all the resources, And what I say is there's normal ways families are paying for college every day. So if we can guide them better through this process and help them figure this out, it's going to work out much better in the long run. And then step number two, we'd say, a lot of people say, well, we don't want any loans. What we would suggest is, because it is an important piece of the puzzle for a lot of families, because there's a funding gap, set a maximum loan. So, and have that conversation with your student that we don't want you to take out more total loans than you think you're going to make your first year out. The math just doesn't work. We don't want you to take out any more total in student loans over all 4 years than you think you're going to make in your first year out, starting salary. So I can walk you through numbers of why that number makes sense, but essentially all the income-based repayment plans, if we just did this on a pre-approval basis, we wouldn't need income-based repayment plans because everybody would be done in 10 years. That's pretty much how the metrics work. You're not going to pay more than 10% back on an annual basis. If you don't take out more than you're going to make your first year out, you'll never be paying more than 10% back per year of your gross salary. So again, this is doing this on the front end. So determine resources, maximum loan amount, and then we go shop for schools within our budget on a net cost basis. Understanding, are we need or merit based? And that's what we'll spend quite a bit of time on today. We talk about the need to establish the maximum loan because we know that not all majors are created equal, right? So when we look at this, it's helping our young adults and helping parents understand that, quite frankly, an investment in education at a college or university for one major or degree is very different than another. So if I go to the same school, my roommate pay the exact same amount out of pocket. He comes out with computer science. I come out with education. The reality is he's making 100% more than me, 2 times as much as me right out of the gate. And the lifetime earnings are probably 4 to 5 times as much, right? So maybe even larger. So his ability to repay a loan is better than mine because he's got a better income shovel. So when we stack all this up, our tool is College Aid Pro. Katie mentioned at the top of the webinar, we've got training and resources, and we've also have a software tool to help facilitate this conversation. So one of the first steps in there is let's talk about what we have, right? So this is a conversation that needs to be happening. Ideally, it's sophomore year. I think that's ideal because it gives us some runway. Then that's also where we begin to have some ACT scores and academic and maybe an idea of what kids are going to do. It becomes more clear in the junior year, but the more time we have to bridge the gap, this is where we start. It isn't necessarily where we end, but if we were going to go to college today, what are we looking at? So we look through, obviously, what do you have in college savings plans? What do you have there? And then also, how many months do we have until we get there? So that gives us that number, and then our total 529 when we start. And what we're looking at here too is, what do we have for this student? So that's really the important part of this puzzle, is what do we have for this student 529 when they go to school? If you've got 3 children, what you like to do for one, you'd like to do for all. So making sure that you're beginning to earmark those is key, right? And then we talk about, are there other assets that you've earmarked for college specifically? Maybe it's a brokerage account because you just didn't want to title up in the 529. Maybe some of the planning you've done with your clients. We said, we created this account. It really was intended to help pay for college. We see that a lot of times with stock plans. People come in and they've got some stock purchase plans maybe through work, and they've always mentally said, that's something we've kind of earmarked for college along the way as well. So next piece that can't be overstated enough is walking through how important cash flow is in this process. So I use an example here of $400 a month. So where do I come up with $400 a month? What we'd say is, if you're doing $200 already into your 529, Mr. and Mrs. Client, we're going to continue that. And then the other $200 just off the bat, without even talking about digging into the budget, is when the students live at home, feeding them isn't free. And a meal plan at a college is usually $2,500 to $3,000 for 2 semesters. So if we look at that and say, well, that's $200 a month, roughly $50 a week that we're going to feed them on campus instead of out of our fridge. So that $400 times 48, it's almost $20,000. So what that process does is it begins to bring clients' shoulders down a little bit and say, all right, beginning to see how this could potentially work out for us. We thought we were only going to have about 25,000 529s in this huge gap. And then we start to say, okay, well, let's talk about tax credits you may qualify for. Again, as hopefully many of you know, the opportunity tax credit is something that it is a pay it forward thing, but it's just a good talking point to let folks know this is a tax credit you'll be eligible for that you've never gotten before, because this is probably your first student going through school. So walking them through how that works and that it is a resource that's available, and letting them know, and then having the conversation about the student. If there's any student assets there, that would include like a custodial account. I think that's important. And then the cash flow piece. If your student's going to work during school, is that just walking around money, or is that actually going to go towards his tuition and room and board? Because that's a very different thing. But in this case, even if it's only $200 a month, or maybe that's internships, $2,500 a year, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's almost $10,000 over 4. So that's $10,000 less in student loans we could have if that were there. So, okay. So, and then the last piece is quantify and qualify outside help. So grandparents and other help. It's really important as we're going into this process. this is a first step of the 6, but if there is outside help, particularly grandparents is the most common, where does that asset sit? Is it in a 529 plan in their name? Is it in a custodial account, a UTMA account? Because the way that money flows into the system, depending if you're a financial aid candidate or not, it could greatly disrupt, the future financial aid for the student. So just quantifying and qualifying exactly where that is, that's an important piece of the puzzle. Again, that's a pretty deep dive we go into in some of our curriculum, but that's just a piece of the puzzle that I think a lot of times it's shocking to me. We've got successful people in their late 40s that make really good incomes, and they still have trouble talking to their parents about money. So this is an opportunity for us as advisors, I think, to pose that question and say, well, then let's get them on board, and don't just take their word for it. We need to see a statement. I can't tell you the number of times where he said, well, yeah, it's a 529, and lo and behold, it is a custodial account, and that custodial account is actually considered an asset of the student, not of the grandparent. So it's a very different thing. Quantify, qualify, get statements. So again, what we're trying to do with this process is let's get all the pieces of the puzzle on the board. So in 4-year pre-approval, these folks thinking maybe 25,000, well, we've come up with 98. So the next piece of the puzzle really is to figure out what is our goal when we're doing all this planning. The goal of doing all this planning is to create a great outcome for a young adult, right? So what we're trying to do, I say, is look into the future. So even today, even if you were a junior in high school, if we could look out and project and say, okay, if we applied that budget to a school we're looking at, and we use our how to pay, which is just kind of a projection, and we said, let's project that we got a little bit of scholarship. We've got our cost of attendance, a little bit of scholarship, our out-of-pocket net cost, 172,781 up here in the top right. We apply our budget, right? So one of the things I think that can't be talked about enough is the need to really show people exactly how they're going to pay the bill. Because the temptation a lot of times is we've got the money, we'll just use a 529 to pay for year 1, and we'll figure out the rest later. Well, the reality is, your resources are stretched out over the years. It doesn't mean this is exactly linear when you actually do this, but just to be able to show folks that, it may not be the best idea to exhaust all 529s in year 1. Things like making sure if we have student loans necessary down here on the bottom, we want to use the federal direct student loan program first, and that's use it or lose it money each year. So the idea is, how do you pay for all 4 years down to the penny, including loans? And we're demonstrating almost a $75,000 funding gap at this institution. What we want to begin to see is, okay, if we have this kind of gap, total loans down on the bottom left, 75,000. Here's your options when you're done. You can pay it off over 10 years and pay $832 a month. Is that reasonable for your young adult, or does that sound like a lot? To me, it sounds like a lot. So what the government would allow us to do is, well, we'll be really nice to you and let you do an income-based plan, and we'll let you stretch that payment out over 25 years. You'll pay us nearly about half, but you can see it's 2 to 3 times as much interest. So who really wins in that? The other piece is, our goal for this young adult is not to be in debt until they're 50. It's to have them out of debt when they're in their early 30s so they can start their life, right? So we're really talking about a comprehensive college funding plan that also sets them up for success to get started in life and be out of debt at a young age. And be able to, buy the house, have kids, save for their own retirement, and save for their own kids' college. So that's, really when we go through that, like I said, we go through our budget, and then the key is how do we plug that in and apply that over the 4 years with College Aid Pro? We've simplified that. We like to think. So I'll shift gears a little bit because we've only got an hour. So hopefully that's helpful to lay the groundwork, though, the pre-approval, and then how does that plug in? How do we show folks how to pay for all 4 years down to the penny? Next piece is helping educate our clients on how this process can work and how do we shop for college. One of the ways I pose that is understand that college is a business and they're selling a great product many times, but they're not all created equal, right? They've got different price tags, and how do we figure out what the value is? So on the left, what we're looking for, what we oftentimes would look at is, these are the 3 things that need to align both an academic fit. So does it have the major that leads you to the career you're looking to get? Social fit. Are you going to be okay in a small, medium, large type culture? What type of activities do you want to make sure are available through the university? Those types of things, right? Those are the pieces of the puzzle that our partners do. Those are education consultants and people that do career counseling stuff. That's not really what we get into. We will take that and apply it and show you the impact of the financials on the school. So when we look at this, though, on the left, what we would look at is both from an admissions and from a financial standpoint. If you are in the top 25% of their incoming class from an academic standpoint, if you're in the top 25%, you have a higher likelihood of getting in. You have a higher likelihood of getting a discount. Because if you think of putting yourself in the school shoes, they're trying to package up a great freshman class, and they're going to incentivize those they really need to get them to come, right? So whereas if you're in the bottom 25%, you may get in, and you're going to be happy to get in because this was a stretch school for you, a real reach. And they're going to say, we don't have to incentivize you. You're going to be happy just got in. So that is something I think for advisors can be really helpful, is just to understand where do we think we may be able to get dollars. Well, if we focus on schools that you're in the top 25% academically, it's going to give us a much higher likelihood. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it gives you a higher likelihood. I'll go through some examples as we go too. Top right, graduation rates. They're abysmal. So less than half of our kids get done in 4 years on average if you spread it across all kids. The reason kids aren't getting done are the things on the left. They didn't do the pre-work, both either academic, so they got to transfer because they don't have the right major, they're not comfortable there socially, or money runs out. So those are the three reasons kids don't get done on time, at a high level. There's obviously special, extenuating circumstances, but at a high level, those three pieces are what drive a lot of the graduation rates. That and combination with just philosophically and how the school goes about making sure kids get done in 4 years. And the thing I will tell you is, as you're working with folks on financial planning, the most expensive part of college is the fifth year, because obviously it adds 25% to the cost, but also most scholarships are only 4 years. So, we only do 4-year scholarship. That fifth year could very well be full price with no discount. So that's and you're not going to stop because you're so close. So understanding and grilling colleges for the consumer, I think, is really important. How many kids are getting done, and then how do you help them transition and get jobs, and what are the internships and job opportunities you get? And then probably the most important piece for us is that we can do on the front end. We don't have to wait until we get all the financial aid back. The system and the schools are going to, they're going to tell us what we think we can afford. We've already said, here's our budget. Now let's go armed with that information about ourselves, and let's go talk to them about how financial aid is awarded. So, and that's what we'll spend the next chunk on, because determining where you sit financial aid wise is key. I put a couple resource sites on the bottom right. Savingforcollege.com has a number of great resources. These particular sites, College Board and collegedata.com in particular, are good sites to find some of that academic information, as well as some of the award information. And these are free sites as well. Some of that, how do they actually award aid? And I'll use some samples from there as we go through, continue on. So financial aid at a high level. We've got merit-based aid and we've got need-based aid. Merit-based aid is actually exactly what it sounds like. It's based on the unique abilities of a student. Apparently playing sports that you never played is one of them now. So, the merit-based scholarship is based on a unique talent, and it's gift aid. It's scholarships. It's money you don't have to pay back. You don't have to work for. Need-based aid is more complex. So need-based aid, you have to demonstrate financial need. We'll go through the basics of the formula. And it can be awarded in the form of gift aid, or it can be awarded in what they affectionately call self-help, which is student loans and work study. Right? So if you had to guess, many of you probably would recognize that student loans is by far the #1 way that we award need-based aid in the country. So there are grants and scholarships out there, and we'll talk through how do you figure that out. When we look at the need-based aid formula, the key here is when we're looking at need-based or merit is to rule yourself in or out of need-based aid early. And there's no need to keep your head buried in the sand. You might as well just go and plug in your income and get your EFC today. That's what I say. So even if you got 8th or 9th or 10th grader, we as advisors can go and at least just help them say, well, let's just go see what your EFC is. Let's go plug in some information on your financials. Let's see what that EFC is. Collegeboard.org has one. Collegedata.com has one as well. Those sites I mentioned. So there's good resources there that you can use. So the basics of the formula, they're going to look at the cost of the school. So the top line, sticker price, cost of attendance. So that's tuition, room, board, fees, etc., the total cost of attendance at the school. And then they're going to say, here's how we're going to figure out your expected family contribution. The way I think of that, it's basically the minimum amount they think you should be able to pay next year towards the cost of education for yourselves. And then so cost of attendance minus CFC equals your need, your financial aid need. So examples I give, if a school costs 50, EFC is 20, you're going to be eligible for $30,000 of need. Just because you're eligible for $30,000 of need-based aid doesn't mean they have it to give it to you. Some schools would meet 100% of that 30,000. Others may only meet 50, for example. So 15,000, and they basically say that 15,000 that we can't meet, that's unmet need, and that's up to you. So again, just because you qualify doesn't mean that they have it to give you. And then another example, 20,000 EFC, same family, but 20,000 of cost, you're going to be eligible for 0 at that school. So we get the question a lot, and people, oftentimes will ask, if we have, when are we ruled out of financial aid? And like many things with college planning, it depends, right? And then the other piece is to understand when we're looking at how do we pay for school for the whole family, what happens when we've got multiple kids in school? Well, in a general sense, it's your EFC is for the family. It's expected family contribution. So at the majority of schools, that would be split. So if you've got 2 kids in school, it's 10,000 each. It's not 20,000 each. It's just 20,000 total. So that can work to your advantage, when you have overlap in students. So planning for that, you got to be careful. It doesn't, like I said, just because you qualify doesn't mean that they actually have it to give to you. But when we're planning for the total cost of college, that's something to be aware of. When you have multiple kids in school, your FC is split. So some of our private schools, it's not exactly 50-50. They use a different formula to figure that out. But at a high level, just something to keep in mind. And again, some of these are hopefully just things you can keep in the back of your head and be able to educate and inform clients on. The last piece on the bottom right. So when we look at this, we look at need-based financial aid, and even for merit scholarship, the net price calculator is required to be on each school's website. So they have to house something that you can go and put in some information on your finances and on your academics, and it will say, if you were to come here, last year our sticker price was 50,000. We think your out of pocket would have been 25,000. We're going to be a little bit of scholarship and some grants, et cetera, et cetera. But to give you an idea of what your out of pocket cost would be, that's what the net price calculator is all about. So really good tool. Again, for these free things, if this isn't something you're doing on a daily basis, getting the EFC and then going out and doing a net price calculator at a couple key institutions in your area, great way to add value for clients, I think. In a meeting, take a half hour, go through, get your EFC and go to college and do a net price calculator, So I think it's just, like I said, a good way for yourself to get an idea of what they may have to come out of pocket, and then also just a great value add to help them through this process, if you're not already doing so. Okay, so the key with all this is what type of family are you? So like I said early on, get your EFC and rule yourself in or out of need-based aid, because the way you shop for college and cut the cost of college is very different depending on where you land, right? So what we use this kind of, this system here to show that, from top to bottom, are you high merit or low merit based on the merit of the student? And then from left to right, are you low need, meaning that you probably won't qualify for any need-based financial aid at the vast majority of institutions, or are you very high need, meaning because of the socioeconomics, you could qualify for a lot of need-based aid. So, on the far top right, if you've got a talented student and you're a high need family, you should never rule schools out based on the sticker price, because the highest priced schools are most prestigious schools. If you're talented, truly talented student, those are the schools that have big endowments, especially per pupil. And if you have need, they'll meet 100% of it. Oftentimes college can be free. Hard part there is getting in. These are highly selective institutions. But finding schools that have got great scholarships and grants that meet 100% of need is key for those top right families. And again, I drill home, never rule out schools based on the sticker. It's all about the bottom line. So what about out of pocket? Top left is where we see most of our families, and probably most folks that are able to be quite candid, to be able to hire a certified financial planner. They're going to be in the top left. So they're going to have very little demonstrated financial need. A lot of times they're dual income, highly educated households, and they've got talented kids that are working hard and getting good grades, because the expectation is they're going to go to a great college and get a great job. So the way those families shop for schools is completely different than the folks on the top right. Both talented students, but in this case, if we're not a need-based family, we need to go find schools that are going to give us scholarships regardless of our need. And we also need to look real hard into the school selection and the value of test preparation. So the value of getting a higher grade, what does that mean to our bottom line and our scholarships? That's key. And then the other piece for these folks up here, if we're not worried about financial aid, need-based aid, we can really do some deep tax planning to help them make sure they're using the resources as effectively as possible, from cash flowing and gifting to different strategies, potentially tax independence for students. So those things are, the things we need to be thinking about. So that's, when we get into, that's our last piece here, we dig deep into the financial aid, the formulas and everything, but at a high level, if you can just go out and use an EFC calculator, that price calculator, and get an idea, are we need-based or not, that's going to add a ton of value for your clients. And then, we're going to begin to shop and dig deeper. But if we've laid the framework through step one, we've got a budget, we've begun to be able to create some realistic expectations around what a reasonable student loan amount would be. And then we've also determined, are we a need-based candidate or not? And then, and then we can go shopping and doing the looking for schools, application admissions, and look into schools and how they actually award financial aid. And then, so a lot of the work I always feel like is done long before this actually starts the application process. So if we've got mom and dad on the same page, and now we're bringing students in, and we've had these conversations, as we begin to go and look for schools that are a great fit and apply to them, our hope is that you should have the schools you're interested in, you should have that pretty buttoned up by August, going into the senior year. Because that senior year goes fast and senioritis is real. So so the application for admissions and for scholarships. So these are the pieces of the puzzle in step two. This happens in about a 2 to 3 month period. They've decided on which schools. The common applications, about 800 schools that take one application. So that's a good one. You can literally go through and click the box and maybe 6, 7, 8, 10 schools that you want. 6 to 8 is a manageable amount. We have had kids apply to as many as 20. The application deadlines and what are the criteria for each specific college, I can't stress the deadlines enough without going through every piece of the puzzle, but we've got to meet them for just for the college, for admissions, and then also for any institutional and private scholarships. Sometimes those for institutional scholarships, there's a separate application and maybe a separate timeline. So you got to understand and be clear, what's the deadline from an admission standpoint, but also when do we have to have everything in if there's additional things for institutional scholarships, right? So that's key as well. And the other stuff, we throw in here because it's important. They're going to want your transcripts and letters of rec and all that kind of stuff as part of this process too. So can't stress the deadlines enough. We had folks call here in November that said, what can we do? We missed the application deadline for the Eminence Scholarship. I said, well, when did you submit it? And they said, well, November 17th. I said, well, you missed the deadline. And they said, yeah, but he's a valedictorian and has a 35 ACT. And I said, well, they're going to be processing about 5,000 applications. And we've literally had this conversation to where they'll say, if you were smart enough, you would have gotten it on time. So these deadlines, I can't stress them enough. The schools are on strict deadlines and they got to keep things moving. So financial aid we'll spend a little time on as well, and then get to some examples at the end. But financial aid is happening now, October of the senior year for the first time. We apply for financial aid each year in the fall for the next academic year. So without getting into all the details, your senior year, when you're putting this in for the first time, is what's called your base year. It's the most important year that you will submit financial aid. The reason is it's called your base year is because they base your financial aid for all 4 years on that. It can change from year to year, but most schools are really trying to package this up so you've got a good 4-year package to be attractive to you to come there over all 4 years. So you got to, we say a file. So that's the year you want to look as poor as possible. So if there's anything we can do with income and assets, we want to do that. We'll go through the timeline and talk through why it's so important that the planning for this begins sophomore year. You want to make sure that the financial aid forms you file are accurate, obviously, but also that they match up. So you want to make sure that you're doing them so that there's no discrepancies. Deadlines are key. And then, like we said, if we're looking at, do we need additional funds, and how do we estimate for shortfalls? So financial aid, I'm going to just go through some of the mechanics, the applications, and the formulas. We're not going to dig into the formulas deep today. It's beyond the scope of today. But from a mechanical standpoint, the FAFSA, free application for federal student aid, it uses what's called the federal formula to determine that EFC number, so how much they think you can afford next year towards the cost of college. So the example I put together, so if we're looking at class of 2020, so if you're a junior in high school now, we're going off to school in the fall of 2020, right? So we're going off to school in the fall of 2020. So right now you're a rising junior. We're doing all those pieces of the puzzle. We're getting the school list, and here come in the fall, 2019, your application for admissions will be, I say get them in by November 1st. It ensures for the most part that you won't miss any deadlines, but make sure you check. And then the FAFSA and the CSS profile, the 2 financial aid forms that institutions may require, open up on October 1st each year. So October 1st, 2019, we just say just go ahead and get them done by November 1st. There's no reason to wait. You might as well get them in. Basically, the way I think of that, if they have money, we would like it. If you have money to give, we would like it. So if we get that in early, we'll be in good shape. So the FAFSA, CSS profile. So what are they looking at a high level? The key is that the base year, the tax year, it's what they call a prior tax year. Many of you are probably familiar with this, but the easy way I describe that to folks is it's the spring of the sophomore year and the fall of the junior year of high school. Spring of the sophomore year of high school and the fall of the junior year of high school. So that's the tax year, because the academic year is always an overlap. So when we go to school fall of 2020, it's for the 2021 academic year. So you've already got your income locked in. If you're a junior, it was your 2018 taxes. So those are getting finished up right now, and not a whole lot you can do for them to make an impact on them. Whereas if we had known this last year, and if you owned a small business, for example, we could have accelerated some expenses or done some of those things. Maybe there's things we could do. So the need to plan earlier with the new timeline is key. And assets that they use, they look at as the day you file. So understand where your assets are positioned, those things that are accessible. That's what they want to know when you actually file. So I'll leave it at that for this piece, because there's a lot that goes into financial aid planning and all that, and how the formulas work. It's just beyond the scope of today. So the vast majority of schools use the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, drives a federal formula. But we do have some of our top schools, select elite schools, around 200 of our top institutions, and they use what's called an institutional formula. So by institutional formula, I kind of think of that as the institutions do what they want, institution by institution. It varies from year to year. It varies from institution to institution. These are higher priced, sticker priced schools. They also have a lot of dollars. So when you're applying through this institutional side, you're applying for their money. So the federal one, you're going to get any federal money. CSS profile, the way I think of that is they're going to be digging in their pocket. So they're going to look deeper into what you have and trying to figure out, a couple things. One is from a need base, what do you got there? And then also, so we're looking at your family. What do we need to do to get you to come here sometimes? And what's reasonable? So just a lot of different ways of looking at that. So I'll kind of leave it at that. Just know they look much deeper into the formulas. I did want to bring up one that comes up really frequently. I have a thing that's called really the 9 key differences. Number one, you got another application, but when we look at the federal versus institutional, there's also another formula called consensus, which we won't get into today. But this just shows the big swing, because in a divorced situation, the federal method, which is noted with the F here, this family is saying it would be a $20,000 EFC, whereas institutional $70,000. Well, why is that big of a swing, 50,000? In this particular case, divorced family, mom makes a reasonable income, but not a huge income, and dad actually does very well. So his contribution was 50,000, but the federal schools didn't even look at his income. So as a resource, so their ability to qualify for need-based aid is a big swing there because he lived with mom the majority of the time. So just understanding there's several key differences. That's one that to be aware of. We kind of go through. If anybody was on I think we did our savingforcollege.com, we did our key differences in the two. We went through examples here as well as home equity's impact and a number of different things on how this works. All right, do we have any questions that have come in? Let me see. All right, I think we're good. So I'm going to keep rolling. We got a few more minutes.
Joe, there actually were a bunch of questions. If you want to take
them.
Yeah.
I'll take a couple
now. Sure. So Jason was asking you mentioned a 49% discount provided off sticker price, and he wanted to know what percent of that is financial aid, I guess need-based aid, and what percent is merit-based aid?
It's a great question. So the one point of clarification is 49% discount of tuition, not the cost. So when they say what that is showing is just on tuition, room and board would not be included in that discount. So room and board is typically somewhere around $15,000 to $17,000. It can be less. 12 to 17, I think, is normal. So when we're talking about, let's say tuition alone was 50,000, maybe they would discount 49. How they award that, it is different institution to institution. So it could be a combination of need-based and merit. So they're just that number is just based around the actual discount on tuition overall. So, and I actually have some examples to show how do you look for and find out, do they give merit scholarships or need-based, which I think will be helpful.
Okay, and then he also asked, who sets the EFC? Is that set by each college?
It's a good question. So when we look at that, there's the institutional formula used by only a handful, we call it a handful, about 200 schools. And then the federal formula is every other school uses the federal formula to determine that. So it's a uniform with the federal formula. The institutional formula, it has some basic parameters, but each school can look at things a little bit differently as far as what they look at and what the aid administrator thinks you're able to pay. So those are schools that they have the resources to really assess families one by one, whereas the schools in the federal formula, for example, Ohio State, they've got 60,000 kids. There's no way they can go by person. But we look at a school like MIT that's only got a couple thousand students. They're going to dig deeper and figure out, here's a real package we think can work. So it's a really good question, but it is it's complicated. So especially for the private schools or elite institutions.
Okay, and one more. What impact does a college prep high school, a private school, have in the cost compared to a public?
So going to a private college prep high school versus public, I think that's the question, right?
Yeah, it looks like, what impact on financial aid?
Yeah, so I think that's actually a larger question, and there's a lot of things going on. It gets down to, will the school that you're going to accept those credits? So, some schools may accept some credits because you went to this prep school and you passed an AP exam, or you had some kind of dual enrollment type of status. It just kind of depends. I can tell you, for example, here in the state of Ohio, we've got a program where you could spend your whole senior year of high school on campus at one of our community colleges or even at Ohio State and actually get transcribed credit and pay $0 for that. So it really depends. These are very regional things as well. So to give it a blanket, it really kind of depends on your area, but happy to talk further because there are ways to earn college credits while in high school and have that go to the college. Most of our private institutions, higher priced, a lot of them aren't going to take a lot of those credits. So just you got to look school by school and kind of think through those. So those are good questions.
Okay. Do you have time for one more, or you want to move on?
Let's roll. So we might answer them, and then I'll make sure I get through the scholarship stuff and wrap up, and then we'll see if we've got time at the end.
Sounds good.
All right. So scholarships is the key for a lot of families, and that's what everybody, it's the buzzword. This chart's just meant to show that almost 9 out of 10 of the scholarship dollars that are awarded are from the institutions themselves. These are the folks that have big endowments and the ability to really help incentivize students to go. I'm not saying don't apply for private scholarships. Apply early, apply often. Just be realistic with expectations, and make sure that you find the schools that are going to give you discounts first before you go hunting for privates. The way in which schools award is kind of the gentleman's question as well. How do they actually do it? Do they do gift aid or what? So even the way that they do their merit scholarships can differ. So the one on the left, competitive. Got 1,000 kids applying. We're going to give away 10, full tuition scholarships. So that's competitive. It's great if you get it, but you can't necessarily count on it. So a lot of schools operate like that. Schools on the right, they're what we call package schools. Our smaller privates, they are the ones that fall in here. There's hundreds of them across the country. What we say is we call it a package school because they have to package things up to compete with the state school down the road. So, a lot of our small privates here in our area are around $60,000 a year. Well, nobody's paying $60,000 to go to some of these small privates because they've got good endowments and they're going to discount $25,000. They're going to try and package it so it's close to what maybe a state school would cost. So that's something to be aware of, and that's a lot of the schools where their discounts are 40 to 50% of tuition. Grid or automatic scholarships are fantastic because they say if you do this, you'll get this. So an example of a grid, or what we call a grid or automatic scholarship is, if you look at Alabama, and there's a handful of these across the country, but what we look at here is the value of getting one. If you have a 3.5, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to recruit great out-of-state kids to come to our school. Alabama doesn't have a great college-going population, so they have to recruit from out of state, and they're willing to pay for it. So this is something you want to know going in. If you've got a 28, we're going to give you $8,000 per year, $32,000 over 4. If you can get 1 point better, we're going to give you $28,000 more dollars. Right? So we look at this and we're looking at college and how do we shop for school. These are the kind of things that if you know this ahead of time, you'd rather know this now than when you're going off to school in the fall. So those are real examples. One of the other keys, I'll kind of wrap on this. I think I've got a little time for a couple examples is, are they merit-based or are they need-based? So the schools on the right, we all know, MIT and Harvard, Notre Dame, Northwestern, these are all schools that meet 100% of your need. These are also all schools that, for the most part, have no academic merit scholarships. Notre Dame and Northwestern obviously have athletic scholarships because they're Division I, but from a academic standpoint, Harvard turned down, I think the number was 1,800 valedictorians got turned away for admissions last year. How would they ever decide? And they don't want money to be a barrier. That's a tough pill to swallow sometimes when you've got a affluent family that doesn't have the dollars to pay that can get into a school like MIT. If you can have these conversations early, that's key. So the schools on the left, these are some great examples of schools. We talked about Bama, but Case and Tulane and Denison are just good schools that award based on merit. They don't really, they certainly look at need, but they give awards based on merit. So a couple examples real quick. So Denison, great school. If you go and visit, this is what they're going to tell you. If you're armed and you can help your clients be armed with what they need to know going ahead of time, they can ask the right questions. So 90% of need met. That's awesome. Our average package for a first-year student, close to 40,000. That's pretty great, off the 62,000. Bottom right, if I don't have any need-based aid, what am I looking at? Well, the average non-need-based aid was over 23,000. Wow, that's pretty great merit scholarship. And again, if you're in the top 25% academically, you have a high likelihood of getting that. Same family. If we looked at Yale, been in the news a little bit this week. If we looked at Yale, we went there, they'd say we meet 100% of need, which is awesome. Average package, 52,000. Wow, that's crazy. Bottom right, I'm not an need-based candidate. How much can I anticipate from your school? $0. So understanding that, and Yale's got some different rules about income thresholds that they'll give you different levels. So, but just going in knowing that they don't have merit scholarships. They just don't have them. If you don't have need, there isn't money there for you. So knowing that going in. Last piece is we analyze and appeal award letters, and then we go to school. So I'm going to do one example. I have MIT versus Case Western. It's a non-need family. 75,000 EFC. You can see the cost of attendance is relatively close. Merit scholarships don't exist at MIT. Merit scholarships, Case Western initial offer was 20,000 off. So you can see almost nearly $100,000 less out of pocket. This is also a very talented student that can get into these schools. We said Case Western, you're our #1 choice, but we have a better offer from another institution. So we were able to competitively appeal that. I'm simplifying this. There's some massaging that goes into it, but they came back with another $5,000 per year, 20,000 over 4, obviously drives down our cost even more. So these are real things that happen. Only about, I'd say, 1/4 to 1/3 of our schools actually participate in this type of appeal process. And if you want to have a leg to stand on, you have to make sure you got schools that will compete when you do come back. I think the last part is putting it all together. So evaluating your options and putting it together, and how do you optimize everything? So when we look at the 6 steps in getting through this maze and cutting the cost, we look at, our tool is going to help guide families through this, where it's going to give them their EFCs at all the different schools, create their college pre-approval amount, then compare schools on a 1-year basis to see what kind of merit scholarships could you anticipate, what kind of percentage of need does the school meet, what's our net cost out of pocket each year. And then on a 4-year basis, if you go here, here's your projected out-of-pocket cost, here's your pre-approval amount, here's a funding gap, and the subsequent loans. And this is really where the rubber hits the road, to be able to show here's 4 years side by side at different institutions, and here's your gap. That can be made up. You can apply additional resources, but if you take out loans, here's the impact. And then the ability to look, at it, and really put it side by side and show them here's your budget applied and here's the loans, and if we go here it's going to be this, and really dig through that. So that's really what we put together through College Aid Pro, is how to piece this all together and accelerate advisors' process with clients. So College Aid Pro, I stuck it in here. There's a free 14-day trial. So Katie mentioned some of the free ideas that we have. That is one. You can do a free 14-day trial. There's no commitment after that, so go check it out, kick the tires. And then what we say is, join the movement. If you want to just get on our distribution list, you can do that at capstonecollegepartners.com. And we also have a free college funding crash course, which is 2 hours of CFPCE, some worksheets, some handouts, some videos, and it gives you an idea really of the format that we go through in our college funding course. So we've got an online training platform that we've partnered with savingforcollege.com to offer a discount. So we've got 2 pieces. We've got the mechanics of college funding, which is purely educational. So it's 8.5 hours of CE. There's videos, there's downloads, there's guides of how everything works. So 6 critical steps would be one, and then there's student loans and FAFSA and how to have the college money talk with your kids. So there's a number of downloads included in there. So that's a discount. You can it's 20% off of what we retail it for. So if people want to get in on that, there'll be a link that'll come out. So make sure that you follow the link to make sure it takes you to the right place to get the discount. And then as we developed our course, advisors said we want more support. So the marketing college planning is really the second component in what we call Mastering College Pre-Approval. So it includes additional training, also data forms, PowerPoint slides, brochures that are completely white labeled and everything. So that's really to help you if you want to go do presentations and present this as a solution in your community. So I know we're pretty much at time or a little over, so I apologize, but hopefully that was good. And if we've got questions, I'm happy to take them.
We did have one question about the scholarships, Joe. And I think this might be part of your software, but they're asking, is there a way to determine before applying which colleges give scholarship aid to high achieving but low need students?
Yeah. So that is something that we've tried to illuminate. It's a very, I would call it, opaque process. Our software, we think, does a nice job of projecting. Our software actually has every scholarship available at the institutions across the country, so you can see what's available and what the criteria are. And then another, just like I call it, kind of free search tools. If you look for non-need merit at collegeboard.org or at collegedata.com, those are just free places. You can go and search a school and just look through the financial aid tab to see, what percentage of kids get non-need merit, and then what's the average amount. And so what you're looking for there is, do they award it? What percentage of kids? And then I always go back to, if you're in the top 25%, you're going to have the highest chance of probably getting some scholarships at a school.
Okay. I think that was it for the questions related to scholarships. I know we had a few asking about whether or not they're going to get the webinar slides and the recording, and yes, you will receive both of those in an email that will go out tomorrow.
Yep. All right, I think we're good. Thanks for having us, Katie. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Joe. And thanks everyone for your great questions. As I said, you'll receive an email tomorrow from savingforcollege.com. It's going to contain your link so you can get your CE credit, as well as more information regarding the special offers from Capstone and savingforcollege.com. And you will get that download, which will contain the slides. And finally, don't forget to leave us a review. We'd love to hear what you think. Thank you.